So I am in Pulaski County. I highlighted the red there just so some of you that may not know where I am will know where I am. Um, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube now. With COVID, I was forced to go on YouTube, which I wasn't real happy with, but anyway, and then also on Instagram. So you're welcome to take a look at some of my posts there. Um, weeds are not, it says weeds are symptoms of problems, and it is. However, a lot of times we just do things that encourage weeds. Anytime your soil is bare, weeds are going to germinate. Anytime you disturb the soil, whether it be with a backhoe or your trowel, that's disturbance, and that's going to bring weed seeds up to the surface where they can germinate in that top, eighth or quarter of an inch of soil. So we want to try to not do those things that encourage weeds. Well managed, if a site is not well managed, this is where your cultural controls come in. And this is probably the only time I'll really talk about cultural controls, but we want to make sure our soils are in good shape for what the desirable plants that we're wanting to grow. We want to make sure that we're not overwatering or underwatering, for that matter, because weeds will take advantage of those situations. I'm not going to talk about turf today, but mowing height is a huge thing. If you mow high, you're not going to have as many weeds as if you mow low. So we need to do all these things correct to minimize our weed problems and maximize our desirable plant growth. And just plant nutrition in general, soils, all that's very important. So we need to be sure we're doing all those things. Contaminated materials are used. Think about when you reuse your potting mix in your containers. I know UK tells me not to do it, but it gets very expensive, so I end up doing it. And yes, there's going to be weeds that are going to be in that mix. So we want to try to avoid that. And last week, Dr. Ellen Crocker talked about the ornamentals that can become invasive. So we don't want to plant a problem. An example that I have for that is that, I came here to Pulaski County about 22 years ago, and there was trumpet vine, campsus trumpet vine in some of the beds over here at the office. And 22 years later, it is still there. So somebody did that on purpose. It's a very pretty plant. You get a lot of hummingbirds that way, but it's horribly invasive. And then just the wrong controls are used. If we're fighting a certain type of weed with the wrong method, you're just going to keep having that same problem. So we don't want to do that. We want to try to get it right the first time. All right, so these are two of my nemesis plants at my house, two of about 6 that I fight tooth and nail every year. But it really is important to know what weed you're dealing with. These two in particular that you see here, the one that has the coppery color to the very tip is Virginia copperleaf, and it is an annual plant, and we'll talk about that in a second. The other plant that you see there is smartweed. I cannot stand these two plants. They are all over my yard, and I will probably never get rid of them, but I fight these all the time. But they are annuals, and we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so first of all, let's talk about these weed types in the sense of their leaves and their venation. So we do have broadleaf weeds. Most everybody understands what a broadleaf plant is. The picture in the background there is broadleaf plantain, and it's a perennial, but it's a broadleaf. And we do have grasses as well. You see the picture on the lower left there. That's broadleaf signal grass. But regardless, grasses are pretty easy to identify as grasses. And then the picture on the lower right there is yellow nut sedge. Sedges are unique. They're not broadleaves, they're not grasses, they are sedges. And if you cut the stem in half, you'll see, as that inset picture shows there, it's triangular in shape. And so the reason we want to separate these out this way is because we have certain herbicides that can control broadleaves and not affect grasses. And vice versa, just all over the place. We got grass herbicides that don't affect broadleaves, and in particular, the sedges are very tough and need their own specific herbicides to really do a good job on those. So having that understanding will go a long way. That's not the hard part. This can be a little tricky. We have to know the life cycle. We have things called summer annuals, and these are annuals that come up with warm weather. The crabgrass on the upper right there is a summer annual. It's not going to germinate till that soil temperature gets to a certain temperature. We also have winter annuals, and these are things like the purple dead nettle in the background. These are weeds that germinate in the fall or winter and overwinter, and then in the spring and the cool weather, they rise up and cause problems. So they're germinating at a different time than the summer annual, so you have to keep that in mind. We have biennials. Biennials, as most people know, are plants that live 2 years. So thistles are an example of that. And then we have perennials, and they can be a booger. So perennials, like what's pictured there, Bermuda grass, oh my God, I hate this weed. I hate this weed. Other perennials that you may be familiar with, dandelions, Dallas grass, which is confused with crabgrass a lot of times in a turf situation, wild violets, things like that. So knowing the life cycle is extremely important because you're going to use different tactics depending on how their life cycle is. All right, so just in general, with annual plants, whether it be the winter annuals or the summer annuals, you want to be sure basically the strategies you have are to try to prevent germination, which can be fairly easy by using just mulches, right? You can use landscape fabric. You can use pine straw like it's in the background picture there. You can use cardboard. You can use just any type of hardwood mulch, anything like that. That can do a pretty decent job on the annual side. We also can use pre-emergence herbicides. They are out there. Those homeowner products that I showed you a minute ago before we started, they can do pretty good depending on the situation. Not every situation is going to lend itself to using pre-emergence herbicides. But then if we think about, well, we didn't do a good job with preventing germination after they've germinated and come up, how are we going to address these annual weeds? Well, basically you got physical removal. So that means you're going to till, you're going to hoe it out, you're going to just knock it out with your hands, you're going to pull it out, you're going to yank it out, right? I am like the best weed yanker around. I do this constantly all summer long. So I'm getting pretty good at it. We do have post-emergent options. They're herbicides. They can be these other chemicals like pictured there on the bottom, which is vinegar. And we'll talk a little bit about vinegar, not a whole lot, but that's just one of the weapons that we have in our arsenal to try to get rid of these annual weeds. And then I put organic in quotations because if any of you all are really concerned about whether or not something is OMRI certified, the Organic Materials Research Institute, those are the chemicals that you can use if you are certified organic. Some of these are not organic. We think they're organic, but they may not be on that OMRI list, okay? So just keep that in mind. Okay, with perennials in general, let's talk about them. In the background, another one of my nemesis, wild violet is back there. You can't really use pre-emergent herbicides on these, although they do set seed and they will, they are seedlings at some point in their lives. But if they have any kind of overwintering structure, the pre-emergents aren't going to do anything about that. So the strategy of smothering with mulches, it's a hit and miss sort of thing with these. It really depends on, what material you're using. And, a lot of these are just very aggressive and they will not die even with mulch put on top of them. Bermuda grass there on the lower left, you cannot smother it enough. It will continue to live no matter what you do. After they come up, after they emerge in the spring or whenever they happen to emerge, we can use post-emergent herbicides. We're talking about non-glyphosate though. We can use post-emergent herbicides. We can also, again, get the mattock out in some cases and just weed them out of there with our hands. And I've marked out other organic methods from the annual list, because these organic type materials are more of a burn down. And so they really, it takes lots and lots of persistence for them to be effective and for you to be successful with them on these perennial weeds. So I guess we could unmark it a little bit, but I marked it because a lot of times if you're just doing it once or twice, you're not gonna do a good job of weed control with these products. All right, so let's talk a little bit about herbicides, okay, just a little bit. But these are not glyphosate herbicides, and these are things that can work for when the weed is up and growing, what you can use to apply to it to kill it. So we do have selective chemicals and non-selective chemicals. Selective chemicals, you need to know about the broadleafs and the grasses and that kind of thing. So herbicides that contain 2,4-D, mecaprop, dicamba, things like that, they're gonna be your broadleaf weed control products. And there's a ton of them out there, okay? So if you don't wanna use glyphosate, but you have a lot of broadleaf weeds, you can still use these products and get pretty good kill on the first try. I will tell you, before I go any further on this, it's always, always, always better to apply these chemicals to young vegetative weeds rather than when they switch gears and go to reproductive mode. When they do that switch, it gets very, very difficult to control them, even with, with something that should work on a young weed, just will not work on an older, mature weed. So put that in there real quick. If you have grasses, like if you have Bermuda grass or crabgrass in your vegetables, for example, or your vegetable garden, you can use these selective chemicals to get the grasses only, and it will not harm your broadleaf plants. So things with clethodim, I think, is called Select. Cefoxidin, that's a Post, I think is what it's called. So you can find these, if I'm not mistaken, in the homeowner aisle of a box store and get just grasses, okay? If you have sedges, you have to pretty much get a selective herbicide for sedges, and that's going to be halosulfuron and what's the other one? Sulfentrazone. So Sedge Hammer has halosulfuron. It does a very good job on sedges, and it will also get some broadleaf weeds without harming your grass. If you have woody plants, like what Dr. Crocker was talking about last week, you may have to go with products that contain triclopyr. And they'll be, on the label, it'll have brush killer or something like that. But those woody plants are very hard to kill, and hard to kill broadleaf weeds like the one in the background, wild violet, you about have to use triclopyr for. But again, those are non-glyphosate products, and they do have you can, what am I trying to say? There's very good, so you can use these to select out certain weeds, and that's a good thing. Of course, we have non-selective herbicides. That means they're not gonna matter if it's a broadleaf weed or a grass weed. So if you spray it, it contacts it, it's gonna kill it, or at least hurt it in some cases. So we do have some of these listed there, diquat, glufosinate. Pelargonic acid is a product called Scythe. The product I showed before, Ground Clear, is basically the same thing as pelargonic acid. It's a little bit different, but it's a fatty acid. And it's just a burn down. All these are kind of burn down types. Glyphosate's the only product we have that really will kill roots, will translocate down to the root and kill it. These other ones are just gonna burn the tops down for the most part, okay? So acetic acid is one of them, and more. So we'll just go on to the next slide and talk about this one in particular, okay? I just saw this one and thought it looked kind of interesting. But these organic chemicals that we have, or we call them organic, are things like vinegar, like the Scythe, like the Ground Clear, Scythe and Ground Clear, all those fatty acid type herbicides. Again, just a burn down, But we also have citric acid, and we have clove oil, and this burnout label that you see on the screen is does contain the citric acid and the clove oil. So these things, I've never used that before, but it was interesting to me to see that we were using clove oil as a herbicide. And then I also read something about chelated iron, which I thought was interesting, and that it's selective, actually. It says non-selective up there, but this one has some selective activity, so it'll only get broadleaves and leave your grass alone. So very interesting. The one thing I want to warn you about on some of these, again, organic type of chemicals is look at that signal word down there on the herbicide label. If everybody sees that, it says keep out of reach of children, and then it says danger. Danger is one of 3 signal words that we have that gives you the acute toxicity of a herbicide to the applicator, the mixer, that kind of thing. So the three that we have, the least toxic is going to be a caution, and then the next one's going to be a warning, and then the most dangerous is danger. So we're talking about this citric acid and clove oil being very dangerous to the applicator, to the mixer, somebody that's going to be handling the pesticide. So keep that in mind. Vinegar can cause irreversible eye damage and can do a lot of other stuff. And I've got a whole publication from Maryland on it that you can look up. But you can't even spray vinegar on, like if you get it on aluminum, tin, iron, things like that, lawn furniture, it'll cause some damage to them. Even sidewalks, masonry sidewalks, it'll etch them. So just be extremely careful with vinegar. This publication from the University of Maryland you can find online. It's called Vinegar, an Alternative to Glyphosate, with a question mark on it. So it's interesting. And just so you know, the weed in the background of this picture, this isn't a weed ID class, but I'll tell you what it is if you don't know. This is Ivy Leaf Morning Glory. It is an annual, and I hate morning glories too. They're everywhere in my soil. Okay, so I showed you the ground clear bottle before we started, and this is this known, I can't even pronounce what kind of acid it is, but it's very similar to the pelargonic acid, this size. This one actually may be OMRI certified. So when you're checking to see that, if that's important to you, that is very label specific, and you'll need to check the labels yourself and make sure. But, 1 to 2 days after I sprayed ground clear, this fatty acid, it looked pretty good. But you can see that I missed, I didn't get a complete coverage of that icky Bermuda grass. So it didn't kill what it didn't touch. And of course, 5 days later, there you go. It's back. It's, it's perennial. It's a tough weed, and you can't. Now, if I did hit this several times with this ground clear, I might be able to make some headway, but it takes lots and lots of persistence and repeat applications. I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about pre-emergence herbicides for the gardener. I showed you the 2 preen products. One had trifluralin in it, and the other one was an organic preen, which is basically corn gluten meal. But these have specific uses, and they can work pretty good. Basically, if you've got some fresh tilled soil and you're not going to disturb that anymore, this can work really nicely. Or if you've got a perennial bed or something like that, you can, and of course you're not going to be digging a lot in there, hopefully, you can apply that to that soil surrounding that. You can use it on top of mulch as well, as long as you're not in there disturbing that very much. Because the whole idea of these pre-emergence herbicides is you apply them and you're going to create, and you have to water them in or rake them in. You have to be sure that you're prepping that correctly. And then you're making a little barrier that's 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch tops across the top of the soil. And anything that germinates in that 1/4 inch area is going to be killed when it starts to germinate. It will be killed by that chemical. This could be desirable things. It could be weeds. So you do have to keep that in mind as well. Anytime that you've got this little barrier and you take your trowel or your soil knife or whatever and punch a hole in it, you've broken that layer. So This is great if you're not going to disturb anything after you put it down. And what you're seeing in the background there is I had some extra soil, came from my mother-in-law's, and I thought, I'm not going to throw that stuff away. I'm going to put it in the bed and we're going to use it. Well, I thought, well, this is a great time to try out these products. So this is what we did. I did. I got me some little chicken wire cages and put corn gluten in. That's on the left side there. And I put the trifluralin preen, the regular preen, on the other side. Hopefully got it to the rates that that the label recommended. I hope I did. I applied that on June 4th. Okay, June 4th. Here's what it looked like July 10th. So that's 36 days after treatment. On the left, you see the organic preen. Had quite a few weeds in it. It was better than the control, though, I will tell you that. But on the right, look at that. I mean, the regular preen, the trifluralin, did a great job. You got 2 weeds there. So that was very good results. And that was 5 weeks or something like that. So not bad, just so you know how these things can work. The next slide might be a little weird to understand, but on the left, I had 2 replications actually. My hort agents are probably going, yeah, you had more than 1 replication, which is good. But different results did occur. So these were the weeds that I pulled in the control plots on the left. In the middle, that was the weeds I pulled from the organic preen. So you see the big difference in some of them. And then the one that consistently worked, though, was the regular preen, the trifluralin product. Very few weeds, and you can see with the mess I had in the other ones. So, you may not want to use some chemicals, but this can go a long way in certain situations and really do a pretty good job. All right, so let's talk about some other non-chemical methods. If anybody wants to know what that weed is, that was another bad one of mine that I have at home. This is called goosegrass. It's got that silver middle, and it is a summer annual. So it comes up every year from seed. And in the plots that I showed you before with the preen treatments, this was in there, and it took care of the preen product, the trifluralin product took care of that, which I was extremely happy with. All right. This is a horrible picture, but I've got a dog that likes to be around me whenever I'm trying to do videos. But I've got a couple of videos on my YouTube channel on flaming. He was not harmed while I was doing this. He just happened to get in the wrong spot at the wrong time. But anyway, flaming is a viable way, viable alternative weed control or organic weed control. When you buy one of these things, you're just buying the wand and the hose and the connector to your propane tank. You're not buying propane. You can get that anywhere. But you hook that thing up, and you can really feel the power of the flame coming out of this thing. Flaming can work in certain situations. You're not trying to burst the plant into flames or anything. You're actually just trying to heat up the plant so that the cells burst. And when those cells burst, you get that water soaked look to the plants like you do on after a frost the night before on plants. So that's what you're looking for. So again, the best use is probably going to be very small seedlings. If you've got a stale seed bed or freshly tilled soil, you let the weeds come up, you flame them. Sometimes in between rows in your garden, it could work. If you ever get a snow, you can melt it off your deck with this. So another use for it. But flaming can work. It's got its limitations though. So here's what some things look like before and just after, and then the next day. So on the left, we have some mixed weeds. There's a couple annuals, the mare's tail's in there, but we also had some wild violet in there. So the top picture is before I flamed it. The middle picture on both sides is right after flaming, and then the last picture is one day after. So you can see that it looks pretty good after one day. In that case, the mare's tail did go away permanently, but the wild violet came back, so you have to hit it again. with the annual sow thistle on the right, actually one application or one flaming did the job on it. So I was tickled to death with that. But you have to get them young. You have to be persistent, and you'll hear that over and over from me the rest of the presentation here, because it's just that way. Another viable method of weed control, which I personally have not used, but there's lots of good data on this, is solarization. That's where you take a piece of ground that you want to plant into eventually. We're mainly talking about vegetables, but it could be anywhere. You work the soil, remove all the plants, kind of get it prepped for planting, and then you cover it with just painter's plastic, just a thin, clear plastic. And you want to leave this covered, and you want to make sure that you get your edges covered with soil, and water it before you cover it. But if you get a good seal on that and you're leaving it out there for a month, you can really do a very good job of weed control. It's going to basically just sterilize the top, half an inch of soil, depending on your soil type, of course. So it basically is going to mimic pre-emergence herbicides, using and not use a herbicide, which is great. All the same things apply, though. If you come back in and you start planting into that, where you broke that layer, there is going to be some potential for weeds to germinate in there. So this is from Texas, and I know Texas is not Kentucky at all, but they solarized this. They had solarized and non-solarized. So the A and B on the top left, they solarized the soil for a month, and then 3 weeks later they took pictures, and this is what you got. Obviously some differences you can see. And then they took that further on the bottom right. This is the same plots 147 days after they removed that plastic. So you're still getting some weed control. And in that solarized plot, only perennials came back. There still was no seedlings that came back, something from seed, they indicated in that report. So it's interesting. And again, this is not Kentucky, it is California. Again, they solarized for 4 weeks, and they planted broccoli on the picture on the left. The 2 rows on the left are 4 weeks of solarization. The 2 on the right are 6 weeks of solarization. Basically, the control is in the middle, and you can see what kind of weed control they've gotten. Not bad, not bad. And this was just a green onion harvest. I threw that up there because that was on the same website as this picture. And I thought, well, maybe you can get a little bit of yield increase with solarizing, but maybe not if you weed it. So it's all very interesting. A really good way to me, the best use of this is for like a fall garden. So you take the hottest part of the summer, take an area out of production, cover it with this plastic and let it cook for a month, and then plant your fall vegetables in it. To me, that seemed like the best method to use that. And I'm a yanker. I don't eat my weeds. I probably should, but this is my next to last slide. I get lots of pleasure out of yanking weeds. And to me, the ultimate revenge is eating them. And there are many, many edible weeds out there. In that bowl, I think there's wild violet and oxalis. That's that yellow wood sorrel. But you can eat lamb's quarter. You can eat dandelions. There's many things that you can eat. So don't be afraid to think of weeds that way. And this is my last one, very, very quickly. And you all heard me say this a couple times, you got to keep on it. You got to get weeds when they're small and be persistent if you're not going to use chemical controls. Even if you are going to use these chemical controls that are organic, you still have to keep on top of them. Pre-emergence herbicides can work as long as you don't disturb that soil after application. And the post-emergence options that are available for selective grass control, selective broadleaf control are out there. So again, not glyphosate. And And then these non-selective organic herbicides, you know, you are going to have to repeat applicate. There's just no getting around it. You've got to apply them more than once, probably more than 3 times. But you know, if you're persistent, then you can do it. Again, I want to reiterate the signal word on some of these pesticide labels that are considered safer to us. Not so safe, so be very, very careful. And one last word, I didn't mention weed whackers one time. I hated weed whackers before I purchased a battery operated one, an electric one, which I dearly love. And it is just perfect. The battery runs out about the time that I'm giving out, and I can sit down and rest and wait for it to charge and go back out there. Weed whackers can do a pretty decent job of keeping things at bay for you, and you're not using herbicide. So that's all good. And with that, I think I'm about done. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them.